Picture this. It is the autumn of 1940, and the sky above London is on fire. The wail of air raid sirens tears through the night, and families scramble into corrugated steel cocoons buried in their back gardens. Anderson shelters that smell of wet earth, rust, and fear. These weren't comfortable refugees. They were cold, cramped, and perpetually damp. Yet millions of British civilians climbed into them and survived, not just because of steel, but because of ingenuity and a fieldcraft knowledge born of pure necessity. Tonight on Fieldcraft Chronicles, we uncover the forgotten waterproofing techniques that turned flooded steel tubes into sanctuaries. The Anderson shelter was a marvel of rapid engineering. 1.5 million units distributed across Britain, each partially buried beneath at least 15 inches of earth. In practice, rainwater percolated through the soil, crept along the steel panels, and pooled on the floor. The bolt holes where panels connected became drip points. Families huddled on sodden floors, listening to bombs fall while water soaked through their blankets. The shelter kept the blast out, but it invited the damp in, and damp, over months of nightly occupation, was its own quiet enemy. Here is where civilian fieldcraft stepped forward. Stripped of specialist materials by wartime rationing, households turned to something humble and surprisingly powerful. Paraffin wax. The technique was ancient. Sailors and craftsmen had been waterproofing materials with waxes and resins for centuries, but British families rediscovered it with urgent brilliance. Thick sheets of brown paper or old fabric were painted with molten paraffin wax, then left to cool into a flexible, water-resistant membrane. These sheets were laid across the corrugated steel roof before the earth was piled back on, acting as a secondary waterproof skin. Melted wax was poured directly into the panel seams, hardening into a seal that kept rain from dripping through the bolt holes. Canvas and old bed sheets, sometimes enhanced with beeswax or pine resin, were wrapped around the shelter's lower walls, where ground moisture seeped through. It was bushcraft applied to urban survival. Paraffin wasn't the only weapon available. Those with access to tar or bitumen brushed it across the outer steel surfaces, sealing leaks while simultaneously fighting the rust that threatened structural integrity over time. Inside, cold dirt floors were covered with old linoleum, repurposed from working-class kitchens into a moisture barrier and insulating layer. Oilcloth was pressed against the lower walls. Every redundant household material became a tool. Every scrap of fabric, every offcut of flooring contributed to the collective effort of keeping water at bay. Even the most waterproofed shelter couldn't defeat a rising water table. In low-lying areas, groundwater welled upward through the floor regardless. The solution was the sump, a small pit dug at the shelter's entrance where water would collect, with a bucket kept nearby to bail through the night. Shallow drainage channels around the exterior directed rainwater away from the entrance. This was fieldcraft thinking at its purest. Understand how water moves, then reshape the environment to redirect it. The knowledge that sustained those families is as relevant today as it was in 1940. Wax-impregnated materials remain one of the most effective, lightweight waterproofing solutions available, requiring nothing more than a heat source and a candle. Understanding how water moves through soil and how to redirect it with simple drainage is a foundational survival skill. Those families didn't have a survival manual. They had observation, memory, and the willingness to improvise under pressure. That is the craft, and it belongs to all of us. If this episode stirred something in you, subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles and join a community that takes both history and preparedness seriously. Share this video with the history lovers, the bushcrafters, and the self-reliant minds in your life. The skills that saved millions deserve to be remembered and passed on. Stay curious, stay prepared, stay in the field.